Chris Peaks here back tonight with Dr. Lucas Wilder. Glad to finally be able to call him that. Hopefully, the university will pick him up soon. Since it's coming up on the anniversary here in a few weeks, we're going to go back to the beginning and we're going to talk about Fort Sumter. Lucas, my man, congratulations on being a doctor. How are you?
I am doing fantastic, especially since I finally got the doctorate. I defended last Wednesday and was conferred a doctor at the end of the meeting, so I'm ecstatic and get to
Well,
add that
hopefully,
PhD to the end of my name.
okay. Sorry. Hopefully that the university will pick you up as you'll be Professor Wilder soon.
That's what I'm hoping for. I've got a few applications out. Hopefully, I get the go ahead and they sign me. But as of right now, I'm still a lonely old park ranger.
Well, they're missing out. Somebody's going to see it. So let's go back. All right. So Lincoln's elected president, and what, December 20th, was it? South Carolina seceded?
Yeah, December 20th was when South Carolina called together their secession convention and decided they were going to leave the Union. And Abraham Lincoln's not even president yet. He won't be inaugurated until March 4th. So James Buchanan is president when South Carolina leaves.
So I wonder if South Carolina had any negotiation or talks with any other governors, or because that's kind of a big matzo ball you're just laying out there. If you're the only one that leaves, ain't it?
There is a little bit of discussion. However, the most of the political discussions that you hear about is after the original 7 secede. So we get South Carolina, Georgia, Alabama, Florida, Mississippi, Louisiana, and Texas. Once those come together, or once those secede, then you see these feeler politicians moving from their state and going into places like Kentucky, Tennessee, and Virginia and trying to convince them to leave as well. That's where you get most of the, hey, what are you doing? Oh, I'm doing this. Okay. Just political maneuverings. You'll see that to a smaller extent at this early stage, but I won't say they're on their own when they make this decision, but they don't have much political talks with the other states. They're hoping that they will join them, but they're not definite in it. Although there are a few states they can usually they're probably going to be able to count on.
So it's in February when they go to Montgomery and draw up the government, and Jefferson Davis is chosen president, I think. Was there anybody else seriously considered beside him?
Jefferson Davis is, well, there's a few other people that are considered. However, many of those other politicians are fire eaters. If the audience isn't aware of what a fire eater is, it's someone that basically wants secession at all costs. They're not too concerned with cooperating with the United States government. They just want to see their state pull out of the Union immediately. When they form the government in Montgomery, the people who meet there kind of shy away from those politicians that are fire eaters because they don't want to be led by any extremist. And it's just like with any election. When we go into a caucus and go into these primaries for the president today even, you'll notice that the extreme candidates, they may get a good little push here and there, but what comes out is the moderate candidate. That just happens. That's what happens almost in every single election. There's a few that you see that don't, but most of the time, the moderate candidate comes out, and that's exactly what happened here. Jefferson Davis is not an ardent secessionist. Not saying he's not a secessionist, but he's not a fire eater, and so he presents a more moderate stance, and so is Alexander Stephens. So that's why those two men kind of come to the forefront. Plus, Jefferson Davis was a longtime politician. People knew about him. He had been a senator. He had worked in all kinds of government jobs. He had been Secretary of War. He had fought in the Mexican-American War. I mean, this man had done a little bit of everything in politics. And so he is a natural choice for the South because of just his gravitas.
And I know we've talked about this before, but why not Breckinridge? Ain't he the ideal candidate? Leading vice president, just was the Southern Democratic nominee.
Well, the problem is he's still vice president.
Oh yeah, that's right.
So he's still the vice president at the time. He's not, and his state hasn't left. Kentucky hasn't left yet.
Yes, Kentucky.
So,
Okay.
so no, he's not going to go. We do see John B. Floyd, who's Secretary of War at the time. Um, he is from Virginia, but we see by early 1861, he's, well, let's say after February, he does start doing some maneuverings that could be seen as fraudulent or scandalous when it comes to helping the Confederacy, possibly. But that's another story for another time. But yes, Breckinridge wasn't chosen simply because his state hadn't left and he was still vice president at the time.
Okay. In your classes are studying this, which I always think, so I love listening to these arguments. What do your professors say, or what was your leaning to, no matter what the reason, because I know I hear this argument all the time, but do you think secession was legal up to that point, or was it clear or not illegal?
I personally won't make a statement on that because
Okay.
I personally, honestly, going through all these different, well, let's just put it this way. The Civil War decided whether it was legal or not.
Okay, that's fair enough.
I'm not a lawyer.
Yeah.
And that's a decision for lawyers. And if I was a lawyer, I could present you with a very lawyeristic answer for that. But
yeah, it's probably, I know it's an unfair question.
The best answer, and honestly, the best answer for anyone to give is the Civil War decided it. It wasn't. That's the ultimately what it was. I'm gonna cut you off right there. I'm getting a visitor inside the house. So hold on 1 second.
Yeah. Sure.
Are y'all back? All right. I'm recording, so.
You say you was back, or?
Oh no, sorry, I'm talking to them.
Oh.
All right, I'm back.
Okay. Yeah. So yes, that's just always been a. I love listening to constitutional scholars talk about that. They know a lot more than I do. But okay, so take us through the next couple months. What's happening there? Are they raising militaries, seizing arms? What's going on both sides?
Well, James Buchanan is president at the time, and James Buchanan is a Pennsylvanian, but he has Southern leanings, at least with his politics. And so when South Carolina leaves and the other states begin to leave the Union, he doesn't like secession, but he doesn't believe he can do anything about it. He doesn't believe that he has the ability to bring them back into the Union. So he's not very effective of doing anything, although we'll talk about what he does do. He's not in this whole hog, just put it that way. So, because it doesn't fit with his political leanings. He doesn't like secession, but he doesn't believe he can do anything to stop it. South Carolina and all the other southern states have began seizing federal arsenals, federal forts. Even states that haven't left the Union are actually seizing some property. Arkansas is seizing some federal arsenals, and many times what you're doing is simply taking the weapons that you can find there and sending the federal troops along on their way. So it's not it's fairly bloodless. South Carolina's having a little bit of trouble because they've got a series of they have a fort in Charleston Harbor, and of course they've got forts. The whole South has forts along their coastline, and Fort Sumter is just one of them. Another one that's under contestation, which we won't talk about today, but just to keep it in your mind, is Fort Pickens down there on the Florida coast, right there in the Gulf. It possibly it possibly could have been the Fort Sumter.
I've been in that fort.
I haven't got the pleasure of going in yet. The time I was trying to get down there, a bad storm hit, and I wasn't able to get out to that island.
Oh, it's huge, man! It's a huge fort. I went all through it. I mean, yeah, you'd like that. But I didn't realize that was the other one. Okay, I'm sorry.
Yeah, The United States, after the War of 1812, started building a bunch of forts. They had grandiose plans, but they only have a few of them built. A couple of them that they had built after the War of 1812 for the protection of the United States coast is Fort Monroe there on the Virginia coast. They have Fort Pulaski in Georgia, Fort Sumter in South Carolina. You have Fort Jefferson, which is down in the Florida Keys area. They have Fort Pickens, a few others, but those are the big ones. And all those I just mentioned are actually national parks now that you can go and visit as part of the National Park Service. So the South is starting to take over these federal arsenals. It's basically bloodless, but Fort Sumter is the one that's holding out. Well, I'll back up. Fort Sumter isn't actually occupied at the moment.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking to ask you about.
Yeah, Fort Sumter. It's actually Fort Moultrie, which is on an island technically in Charleston Harbor. Well, it's on an island that's basically connected to the mainland, and once kind of the tensions start to rise up, there's somewhere around 6,000 Confederate troops that are positioned in South Carolina by the time, by March, late March, early April of 1861. There's about 6,000 of them. Most of them are South Carolina troops, but by this time the Confederacy is already formed. Jefferson Davis has appointed PGT Beauregard to command the troops there. There is a contestation between what authority is actually in charge. Is it the state of South Carolina? Is it the Confederacy? That's actually kind of debated at the time of who is supposed to be given the orders here. However, again, about 6,000 troops at Fort Moultrie. Anderson has around 85 men, plus some more work laborers, people that came to help work on the fort. So he's got probably somewhere a little over 100 men total, but 85 soldiers he's got. He will move from Fort Moultrie to Fort Sumter under the James Buchanan. When March 4th rolls around, Abraham Lincoln is inaugurated president, and now he's going to have to deal with the situation that's erupting in South Carolina around Fort Sumter.
Okay. So what is Lincoln doing? Is he taking a wait and see approach, trying to be cautious, or is he trying to see how far they're going to take this?
Lincoln is a master politician, and he knows that he does not want to fire the first shot or be seen as the aggressor. Neither does Jefferson Davis. Davis is very cautious about this because he knows that if he makes a move that could be seen as being the aggressor, he might lose those border states. And border states including not just Kentucky, Missouri, and Maryland, but he's also concerned about Virginia. He's concerned about North Carolina, Tennessee, and even Arkansas. So he's afraid if he's the aggressor, it might send these states into the arms of the Union if he's seen as the aggressor. And Abraham Lincoln's seeing the same thing, that if he acts like the aggressor, then they might shift to the South. So Lincoln wants to put the ball in Jefferson Davis's court. His plan is to resupply, and that's it. Resupply the fort with no ammunition, no extra men, no weapons. Simply, let's get supplies to them so they can, eat. This had already been done or attempted to be done previous. The Star of the West was sent by James Buchanan in early 1861. The Star of the West was supposed to give ammunition, I think a few extra men, but ammunition and supplies as far as foodstuffs to Fort Sumter. He gets to Charleston Harbor, and the Confederates fire on it, and it has to turn away. It cannot stay in. It cannot deliver the food that it was supposed to give to the fort. That came very close to inaugurating civil war there, but because it was a merchant vessel, it didn't have any guns on it. It couldn't answer any return fire. It simply turned around, and so war is averted in that early stage. But now Lincoln is going to be sending ships that are going to be carrying supplies, and he writes to the governor of South Carolina, and he does that specifically. He's writing to the governor of South Carolina because he doesn't want to recognize the Confederacy as a nation. Jefferson Davis he's not president of anything because the Confederacy doesn't exist. Who he's going to do business with is the governor of South Carolina. So that's why he writes to Governor Pickens saying, hey, I'm just going to send a ship with supplies. Nothing more, nothing less. What you do next is your decision. So he has put the ball in the South's court. Now it's going to be their decision. Are they going to be seen as the aggressors? Now, Jefferson Davis and the governor of South Carolina will kind of discuss what should be done. Jefferson Davis will come together with his cabinet and try to decide on what's going to happen next. And they do decide to try to, force the capitulation of Fort Sumter one way or another. And Robert Toombs, a Southern politician, and he will say to Jefferson Davis that the attack will lose us every friend at the North. You will only strike a hornet's nest. Legions, now quiet, will swarm out and sting us to death. It is unnecessary. It puts us in the wrong. It is fatal. And so Jefferson Davis's decision is not favored by everybody. Again, everyone sees that being the aggressor is not the best choice. But if you allow a ship to come into Fort Sumter, it's only going to prolong the issue. So Lincoln did a masterful job in forcing the South to act. Beauregard is in command of these troops, and so with authority from the Confederate government, he is going to send over 3 men. One of them is Stephen D. Lee, who seems to be everywhere in the war and is quickly becoming one of my, militarily at least, one of my favorite commanders of the war because of everything he's able to do. It doesn't matter what position you put him in, he's going to be a good commander no matter what. He sends over 3 men to the fort and delivers the ultimatums. We're gonna have to fire on you if you do not evacuate or do not leave. And Major Anderson, who is in command of the fort there, makes a weird comment to them, and he says, basically says, if you wait long enough, we're going to have to leave anyway because we're going to run out of food. And this tells the three soldiers, 3 officers that have given him this ultimatum that maybe we can avoid bloodshed and they'll leave if we just wait enough time. So they go back and tell Beauregard, hey, it's going to be okay. They're going to run out of food very quickly. And so he sends them back over and says, well, what time will you run out of food? And so he says, by noon on April 15th, we should be out of food and we'll have to leave. So this is not going to sit well with Beauregard, who knows that ships knows that it's going to be resupplied very soon. So he does not want to run the risk of it getting supplied before April 15th. And so on the morning of April, this is all happening in the early morning of April 12th, 1861. And so the officers come back, give Beauregard the bad news that that they could survive for at least 3 more days. And at 4:30 a.m. on April 12th, the first shots of the Civil War were fired. It was fired from Fort Johnson in Charleston Harbor. And the bombardment lasts for about 36 hours.
Now, what time did those 3 men, they went over there that night?
They were there a little bit after midnight.
Okay, they came back and they gave Beauregard. Now, I'm guessing Beauregard didn't confer with the president. He just went ahead, or the governor just gave the order.
Right. Well, Beauregard was there under the authority of the Confederacy. He was not under any authority. He was not under any obligation to agree to anything the governor had to say. Although most of his troops were South Carolina troops. Again, this is a kind of a gray area who is actually in command here. But Anderson doesn't have enough men to actually man all of the cannons that's at Fort Sumter. What he's going to do is have 3 different alternating crews. and they're going to fire somewhere around 6 guns is all that the fort's ever going to fire out of itself. The problem with Fort Sumter is that it was supposed to guard against stuff coming from the ships coming from the Atlantic, and it wasn't really positioned to fight off a land assault from Charleston itself, and so it can't return a lot of fire. But he's only got enough men to operate for a little while, so he divides them up into 3 different groups, and each group will run the guns for 2 hours, and then they'll switch, and they'll run for 2 hours, and they'll switch to the next one. So everybody gets a little bit of a rest. He will, and even though the Confederates fire at 4:30 a.m. on April 12th, Major Anderson will not return fire until about 7 o'clock the next morning after his men have eaten breakfast and gotten up. It's a scary situation, but it's a really well defended fort as far as masonry work is concerned. And so the Union will come out, fire at 7 o'clock. They'll fire a good portion of the day, and it starts to die down as the morning wears on, and it gets bright in daylight. It'll start to kind of fade off, and only a few guns are firing at that point. Once the nighttime, once night comes around again, it will it starts to erupt again, and the Confederacy are firing hot shots, so they're heating up their round. Solid shots for their cannons to red, scalding hot. And there's even though it's a masonry fort, there's actually wooden buildings on the inside of the fort that's acting as barracks for different soldiers and things like that, for officers and privates alike. And so when they fire those hot shots into the fort, it sets those buildings on fire. And not only do they have men stationed in those areas, they've also got black powder and ammunition stationed in those areas. The Union have only about 700 shots that they can fire, and their men are having to sew their shirts together into little bags to hold the powder to be able to load the guns. It's a desperate situation for them. At one point, the black powder storage is threatened to be actually get hit and blown up and catch fire, and they're able to save about 50 out of the 300 barrels of black powder. And it's a very scary situation for them inside the fort. Again, this bombardment goes on for about 36 hours, not constant. It's a constant fire, but it's not all the guns are going off all the time. And Beauregard's got to conserve ammunition too. He doesn't have his, I don't know the numbers on how much he has, but we do know he was conserving lots of ammunition. They make it into the next day on April 13th, and about 1 o'clock, the flagpole gets hit, carrying the United States flag. And so they put it up on another parapet, put it up there. And there's a gentleman that takes matters unto himself. His name is Lewis T. Wigfall. He was a senator from Texas. He was originally from South Carolina, and he actually goes over to the fort. He's actually on Beauregard's staff, but he hasn't talked to Beauregard in about 2 days. He takes it upon himself to go he gets a soldier and gets 2 slaves to row him across into Charleston Harbor to Fort Sumter, and he talks to Anderson on behalf of Beauregard, which he's not authorized to do. And basically kind of negotiates somewhat of a surrender. He comes back and he's kind of celebrated by the men around him. Unbeknownst to him, Beauregard has sent some of those same men that he had sent earlier back to Fort Sumter. And they say, okay, we want to discuss terms of surrender, because they have seen the little white flag that Wigfall had given them, given the United States. And it's like, okay, but I just got done talking to someone and already discussed it. Well, he's not authorized, and so this makes Anderson even angry, and he even contemplates keep on fighting, although he decides not to. So after 36 hours, he decides to formally surrender. Now he gets authorization from Beauregard that he can fire a 100-shot salute to his flag. And as they're firing the 100-shot salute, a spark hits some ammunition that is laying out, and it actually it kills one man and wounds a handful of other men. So no one dies during the bombardment. For 36 hours, there's shells flying into Fort Sumter from Charleston Harbor. Not one man gets killed. But when they fire the salute, one man gets shot or gets injured. One man gets killed, a handful others get injured, and when we see, and then one of those men that was wounded will die a few days later. So
actually two died.
Two died technically, but one died on site. The other one died a little bit later in a hospital. Anderson is allowed to leave the fort. He's originally from Kentucky, which kind of endears him to Abraham Lincoln since both of them are from Kentucky. And the war has started. Now, the implications for Fort Sumter are huge because now the South is seen as the aggressor. However, when the South fires on Fort Sumter, Lincoln calls for 75,000 volunteers. Those 75,000 volunteers instill a kind of a secession movement in those border states. And when I say border states, it's Virginia, North Carolina, Tennessee, and Arkansas. Those four states will leave the Union after Fort Sumter has been fired on. In their secession convention and their ordinances of secession, they will write out, at least a couple of them will, that the reason they're leaving is because they're afraid of the Union Army that's being raised to go suppress their sister states. So what are they going to do when they come through their state? So that's Fort Sumter. Yes, it begins the Civil War, but it also is one of the dominoes that leads to 4 other states seceding because Abraham Lincoln calls for 75,000 volunteers.
I was thinking about this the other day. Actually, asked somebody this on what if get to change things. If the governor of South Carolina or Jefferson Davis, whatever, wrote out a proclamation or something and just decreed that fort back to the Union, where would they went from there?
Well, I guarantee that wouldn't have happened, but it's a good idea. It's a thought. You never know what could happen. There are some Northerners that say, "Hey, just hand it over to them." So you never know what would happen. But Lincoln always said he wanted to be the president of all the United States. He was not going to give up without a fight. But I love Lincoln's political maneuverings when he's trying to get the South to make that first move, and he does it beautifully. A wonderful job.
Is it safe to say that he baited them and they took it hook, line, and sinker?
Oh yeah, I wouldn't put it any other way. I mean, I think he knew exactly what he was doing. Not that he hoped that war would start, but if it did, it would be their act of aggression first. I don't want to make Lincoln out to be a warmonger. He wasn't.
No.
He didn't like war, but again, he wanted to be in the right in this, and he was going to. If anyone was going to start it, it was going to be them.
So let's say that Virginia stays in the North, and they declare any neutrality. Does Lee still stay on the sidelines?
There's actually a few scholars that say he wouldn't. I still don't know if I buy it or not. He did have an affection for the South. Whether he would have went with the South without Virginia, I don't know. I think Stonewall Jackson's a little bit easier to read than Lee on that. At least as far as his letters go, it seemed like he was going to go with Virginia or not. But Lee was a little different. Again, there's some scholars that argue that he probably wouldn't. There's a possibility he would have went with the South, whether Virginia left or not.
What about staying with the North?
He's again. The way this author has kind of put forward, and if you want to read the book, it's Lee the Man. The author does a wonderful job of explaining that he even went back and forth in his own letters of whether he would be going for the Union or the Confederacy. It was not a clear-cut decision. People seem to think that when Virginia goes, that he's all up in arms for Virginia. It's not exactly the case. He's still on the fence because he spent his entire life in the United States Army. Would he leave or not? It's not as easy of a decision as most people make it out to be. But the South needs Virginia. Virginia has a huge white male population that they're going to need to fight in their army. They've got ironworks. They've just got material. They've got war materials. They've got railroads. They need Virginia. If Virginia doesn't go, I think we've discussed this before. If Virginia doesn't go, the South doesn't last very long, and that's not even factoring generals. I'm just talking about materials, resources. They don't last long because of that. North Carolina and Tennessee are right there beside of them with materials and men.
I mean, with Sam Leifert, and then his connections, everything says United States. I mean, father, Revolutionary War hero, married into George Washington's family, home on Arlington. I mean, it's just everything about that city. So it had to be a heart wrenching just decision he made.
Yeah, it's not easy, and I don't think, with the exception of a few that probably had no problem choosing the South, many of those United States soldiers that had to resign their commissions did so with a little bit of reluctance. Whether it's a great deal or not, I think it's a matter of degree. But I don't know many of them that would have just threw up everything. Said, "Well, I'm going with the South." This was a hard decision for a lot of them. They were.
Yeah, I mean, so they've fought the Mexican War together, West Point together.
And to that point, Major Anderson was actually one of the professors for PGT Beauregard, the two men that were facing off in Charleston Harbor. Not only that, you've also got Beauregard was kind of the assistant to Major Anderson there for a little time. So these two men knew one another, and a bunch of these men knew one another on both sides. One of the men inside the fort in Fort Sumter is Jefferson C. Davis, who becomes a fairly prominent Union commander in the Western Theater. These men have known one another through the Army, at least partially. I mean, if just passing, they've known one another. That's one thing that's horrific yet beautiful about the Civil War, is that these men were comrades in arms, and then some of them fight with one another, fight against one another. It's beautiful yet depressing all at the same time.
Yeah, kind of like almost Shakespearean in a way. Well, stay on Fort Sumter for a minute. The plan that General Scott came with, the Anaconda plan, is that safe to say he was trying to end that with as few casualties as possible by controlling the Mississippi blockade and then putting pressure on the capital?
Yeah, that's absolutely. It was actually more of a pipe dream. In all honesty, the United States did not have a navy capable of blockading all the major ports in the South. Especially at the beginning of the war, they didn't have enough navy to do that. However, by the end of the war, it's arguable that they actually did have enough ships to do it. But you still had blockade runners that were able to get in and out. The Confederacy was surviving decently on blockade runners, and we'll never know the full capacity of how well it worked. But at the beginning, yes, it was trying a way to squeeze the South into submission. If you can stop stuff from coming in and stuff from going out, that dominance that King Cotton had on the entire world would be nullified, hopefully.
Yeah, I've read some scholars say that too, that the blockade is really not effective, not at all really until the later stages of the war, when they obviously took most of the ports.
Yeah, I mean, that's the honest truth. Especially at the beginning, it took a couple of years for the United States to get a navy that was able to blockade all those ports sufficiently. Even then, you still had problems. So, yeah,
that's a huge coastline.
Yeah, so it's a unique situation because the United States hadn't had to do anything like that before, and the United States at this moment, the United States Army is about 16,000 men. And probably less, considered that those 7 states have left now. At that point, by Fort Sumter, 7 states have already left the Union. They've taken many of their soldiers with them, including men like Beauregard. So it's even less than 16,000 by this point. 16,000 men, and the Navy's not any better.
So after this attack on Fort Sumter, is there any type of talk or negotiations between the two sides, or they just go straight at it?
Well, the Confederacy will attempt to send emissaries to Abraham Lincoln,
Mhm.
but Lincoln won't have them simply because he doesn't want to recognize them as an
Oh yeah,
actual
that's right. I
nation.
remember reading that.
So no, we know about the River Queen incident where he meets with Alexander Stephens and a few other dignitaries, but especially at this early stage, he's having to set a precedent that the Confederacy is not a legitimate country, and those politicians, the president and the vice president, are not legitimate, and so he has to keep that up. He has to enforce that they are not legitimate, because if he doesn't, and he accepts them as dignitaries, as diplomats, then it gives kind of the other countries the go ahead of, hey, we can hear them out. And Lincoln's very careful about that. He will also try. Now he'll call it a war, but he emphasizes that it's a rebellion, because if you term it an actual war and declare a war, you can't declare war on yourself. You have to declare war on another country. Therefore, you recognize them as another country. So he's very careful in his wording as well.
I got to thinking today. I guess what's going on in Russia and Ukraine. What would it be like today with today's media if they was trying to cover this? How would it be portrayed? Who would be seen as the good side, the bad side of world media? What would CNN be reporting?
Well, funny you bring that up. I'm wanting to start um, a new series on my YouTube channel. I don't know if I have time to do it, but it's in my head, and it's been in my head for a year or two now. I'm wanting to do kind of a satire of a news network. Now, it's not going to be modern. It's going to be old. So it's going to be taking you back in time. And what would a 24-hour news channel look like in March of 1776?
I like that.
What would they be talking about? How would they frame things? And it would all be factual, but I would take different tones and try to show people, it's going to be a funny satire of kind of a comedy about what modern 24-hour news stations do, but it's going to be about historical events. So it's playing around in my head. I'm working on it. So I'm trying to actually figure that out. You may actually find one of my videos in the future about Fort Sumter and what would a news station be saying at this point. I'm still writing up some of the examples.
I did a post in the moderator group one time fooling around. Said, what if they had elections in '64 and instead of Davis just wants 6-year term? I was like, CNN would have who did I have my 4 candidates? Beauregard. It's time to put a general in charge. Alexander Stephens, man of the people. I forgot who else. I had 2 other people challenging Davis and said, last week they're expecting to get the military support. General Lee campaigned with him in Petersburg, where they're up under entering a siege. And I was like the Wolf Blitzer election updates and things that's coming in. So I look forward. I hope you do that. That'll be a lot of fun to see what they would 24-hour news network would say about that then.
Yeah, it's something. It's a funny thing to think about, just simply because different people spin things different ways, and so how would each side look? But
you can put you flip it from 2 major news networks, and you same story and 2 different sides of it every time.
Mm-hmm.
Well, let's see. That's pretty much the only thing I've got on this. I want to tell you something. I cut tape. Is there anything else you want to add to this one?
No, I think we covered it nicely. It worked out really nice.
Right here in